PokeClass is sponsored by CollectorsCash.com, and they now have Dark Explorers in stock at incredible prices. Are you looking for that last card to complete your deck, or looking to boost your collection in any set of the game? Then Collector's Cash is where you need to be. They stock all of your boxes, tins, and singles of Pokemon, and any other card game for that matter, at very competitive prices. So make sure you visit www.collectorscash.com after the show. Hey everybody, and welcome to episode 70 of PokeClass. Now, as promised, I'm going to be doing another deck analysis today on one of our new decks born through Dark Explorers. So today I'm going to be talking about this card, Zoroark, and it's actually available in the theme deck, so it's not going to be the most expensive of decks, even though it does have some expensive elements to it, but it focuses on getting out fast attackers on turn 1, and is pretty consistent at that. So without further ado, let's get straight to it. So the main player in this deck is Zoroark. It has a decent 100 HP and attacks for a double colourless. As you noticed, its first attack is called Brutal Bash and does 20 damage for each dark Pokemon that you have on your side of the field. So including the active and the 5 bench spots, that's going to be 120 damage for just a double colourless. Now the second attack for 2 Dark Energy does 20 damage, but it does 10 more damage for each damage counter on your Zoroark. So it's kind of like an Outrage style attack, but for 2 Dark Energy rather than the double colourless of a normal Outrage. It's not going to be worth it, but in some cases it might just be a useful attack to use, depending on the situation. But anyway, the main focus of this deck is the first attack, Brutal Bash, as I just mentioned earlier. Because it only takes a double colourless and can be set up in one turn, but the main aspect of this deck, and what makes it so fast, is the Zoro beneath it, because it has the attack Ascension. For 1 Dark Energy, what you get to do is similar to Spiritomb if you played in the format before this one, and it allows you to search out a Pokemon that evolves from Zora and put it on that Pokemon. So turn 1, if you have a Zora and a Dark Energy attached, you can evolve straight into Zora at turn 1. So you don't even need to search out of your deck for turn 2. So as you can imagine, this deck is fairly fast and quite efficient when it comes to getting the turn 2 attack. However, you do need some support Pokemon, and there's not that many Dark Pokemon out there at the moment, but the ones that are out there are supported by the new Dark Trainers that give it a lot of support in energy acceleration and damage output, and even mess with the opponent's hand in some cases. So without further ado, let's look at a quick skeleton list to get you started on building this deck. So of course, first off you have 4 for Zoroark, as it's your main starter that you want to get, because you want to get that Ascension on turn 1, and 4 Zoroark just to keep the stream of Zoroarks coming. So I've already covered the cards, so you don't really need to know much more about it, apart from attacks for double colourless, can attack on turn 2 fairly efficiently. So let's look at the support Pokemon you can be using for this deck. To support your Zoroark and add to its damage output, we've got a 3-2 Weavile line. Now Weavile is actually a really good attacker and has a really good Poke Power as well. Its Poke Power Claw Snag is the main thing you'll be using with this, and it allows you to look at your opponent's hand, choose a card there and discard it. As simple as that really, and it adds a really nice level of disruption to this deck. If your opponent's just holding the one supporter like a Pon or something like that, and the rest of the cards aren't that helpful in the state of the game at the moment, especially in the first few turns of the game and at the end game, then you can just Claw Snag it out and they're going to have to be in top deck mode for the rest of the game until they hit a supporter. Now this can be devastating at the best of times, and Weavile's attack isn't too bad either. Feint attack for a dark and a colourless does 30 damage to any Pokemon on your opponent's side of the field. Now this 30 snipe doesn't seem too much at the moment, but in certain situations when you just can't squeak that KO with Zoroark's Brutal Bash, you will be able to pick it off later on in the game, and you will be able to accelerate it with Dark Patch, and even attack the active for more damage with help of Special Dark and Darkness Claw, which I'll get onto later. Another nice feature of Weavile is that it does have free retreat cost, as well as the Sneasel below it, so it gives you a very versatile starter for the game if you want to start with Sneasel and then you can free retreat into your Zora after using a Pokemon Collector or something to search it out, so that you can get that turn 1 Ascension a lot more often. Now this may seem like a thin line at the moment for a deck that does need a full bench of Dark Pokemon, but you can add some in later, and which I'll get to when we get to the tech section of this video. And to finish up your line of Pokemon, we have 2 Darkrai EX, probably one of the most hyped cards from the new set. Now this is one of the most powerful, or the most powerful Dark Pokemon in our game at the moment. It has an amazing ability, Dark Cloak, which allows you to have free retreat on all your Pokemon that have dark energy attached, and it has a really good attack as well for 2 dark and a colourless. It does 90 damage and 30 to any of your opponent's benched Pokemon. Now this attack can be powered up fairly quickly with Dark Patch, and then powered up in damage output with the use of Darkclaw, which I'll get to in a second. But the snipe and heavy hitting damage, to be fair, for the amount of time it takes to set up, is really powerful in this deck. If not just for the free retreat that you get with it. If you can't get the double colourless or an extra energy to get onto your Zoroark, you can just free retreat it into something else, use a different attack, or yeah, it just conserves energy, and make sure that you can just have a very, very versatile field. So that's it for Pokemon in the deck until we get to the tech section. So let's move on to trainers and supporters, and here we have a nice array of specifically dark supporting trainers that we can use to make this deck as fast as possible. Now of course we're going to need to have 4 collector in this deck. A lot of people and decks have moved over to using cards like Dual Ball, Level Ball and Ultra Ball in their decks rather than Pokemon Collector, so it gets them to use their supporter on the first turn as well as being able to search out basic Pokemon. Now the issue with this is that you're not always guaranteed a basic Pokemon with stuff like Dual Ball, and that is pretty detrimental to your strategy. If you can use Collector on turn 1 and possibly turn 2 as well, you'll be able to get your Ascension going, and you'll be able to get multiple Sneasels and Darkrai's on the bench, ready for some Claw Snags and some free retreat later on. So yeah, it's just a really good card to have in this particular deck, and the Ball Engine can be used, which I'll get onto later, but it's just not as consistent as using collectors over and over again to fill up your bench consistently. So onto your draw support now, and you have 4 Professor Oak's New Theory, 3 Professor Juniper and 2 N, which are all going to help you to get your turn 1 or turn 2 Brutal Bash as efficiently as possible. Now 4 Pont just conserves your resources a lot more than stuff like Juniper, but I would like to get a 4th Juniper in there if you've got the free space, if you haven't used it for anything else, because it just keeps your deck running as swiftly as possible, because you may be able to fish for stuff like Dark Patch, Dark Claw, Catchers, Junk Arms in the mid to late game, and it just helps you to draw your cards much more efficiently. Now N is a very powerful card at the moment, but possibly not in this deck. Ending yourself down to anything lower than the 3 card hand will make your resources limited, and you haven't really got any way out of it since you don't run Cleffa, Smeargle or anything else like that. Now since your Zoroarks are pretty fragile with 100 HP, they will be getting knocked out often, so ending them down to a very low amount of cards will just stop them getting that KOs on the Zoroark, and possibly stop them just for that 1 turn to help you get the prize lead. Not only that, but if you end and you draw into a Weavile of your own, you can evolve into Weavile, use Claw Snag, and Claw Snag possibly the only out of their 3 or lower card hand from N. Now this is very disruptive and will possibly win you several amounts of games just by this 1 Poké Power. It's very disruptive and just too good not to include in this dark deck. And up next is your standard 4 Junk Arms, since you do have a lot of support for dark Pokemon in this deck, which moves me on to my next card, which is Dark Patch. Now Dark Patch is from our newest set, and what it allows you to do is you play it and you're allowed to attach a basic dark energy from your discard pile onto one of your benched dark Pokemon. Now it is only your bench dark Pokemon, but since you've got free retreat in there with Weavile and anything else that has dark energy attached already because of Dark Cloak, it's not going to be too detrimental to your strategy. You do want 4 of these in here just because it's your main form of energy acceleration in here. You don't want anything like Shaman, Energy Switch, or anything else to get energy from the discard pile onto your Pokemon, which is incredibly important in this format. So 4 Dark Patch and 4 Junk Arms should keep your energy flowing as well as possible throughout the game. And then we move on to 4 Pokemon Catcher, which is pretty much what you need in this deck, and possibly any other deck in the format. Because you're attacking fast from turn 2 and you want to pick off all your opponent's evolutions or basics that are going to cause you trouble later, you do want 4 Catcher in here just to pick off your opponent's Pokemon before they become a specific threat. The main Pokemon you will want to be picking off before they get set up are stuff like Terrakion and Groudon, which are going to cause you a lot of problems, and I'll get onto a tech for that later. So yeah, 4 Pokemon Catcher is just going to keep your opponent on their toes and disrupt them as much as possible, which is especially helpful when you know what they've got in their hand with Claw Snag. Your next 2 cards are Pokegears instead of the new Random Receiver, and you may think this is a strange choice, but Random Receiver is actually better in decks that run the Ball Engine with Dual Ball and Ultra Ball, as I mentioned earlier, because your support count's a bit lower because you don't run Pokemon Collector, and with these kind of decks you do want to run Pokegear, because with Random Receiver you don't get a choice, but with Pokegear you get to look at the top 7. Odds are, with the amount of supporters you run in this deck, you're going to hit a supporter in the top 7 cards. But the main issue is you do want to get that Pokemon Collector on turn 1 if you haven't got any other supporter in your hand. Getting that collector turn 1 is so important in this deck, and possibly on turn 2 as well if you have a way of searching it out later on, and in the late game as well if you just want to power up more of your Pokemon. And it's just a basic consistency booster in any other situation. It gets you the turn 1 collector as often as possible, and gets you them draw supporters when your hands are looking low. And onto your second support for Dark Pokemon, and this is Darkclaw. This card is a Dark specific Pokemon tool card, and when attached to a Dark Pokemon, it allows your attacks to do 20 more damage to the opponent's active. Without Darkclaw, you'd only be able to do a maximum of 120 damage with double colourless attached, and that's without regarding stuff like plus power and special dark. And running Darkclaw really does negate your need for using plus power in the first place, since it's like a consistent plus power that can use every single turn. And other than that, it's just going to be able to break that 130 barrier you're going to need to knock out fresh stuff like Zekrom and Terrakion that are really going to cause you troubles otherwise. This card also works well with Darkrai, since you can do 110 damage to the active rather than the 90, and makes it a much more proficient attack. And your last card is Super Rod, pretty much standard in every deck right now just to get that bit of recovery, because your Zoroarks are pretty fragile, as I did mention earlier, because they only have 100 HP, a lot of stuff does 100 damage at the moment. Stuff like Darkrai is going to be able to do 100 consistently every single turn, as well as Zekrom Eels can Bolt Strike every single turn. And yeah, the 100 damage is not hard to break in this format, so you're going to need Super Rod to get those Zoroarks back from the discard pile into the deck to search out later on. And this brings me on to your energy, of which you run 3 Special Dark, 6 Normal Dark and 3 Double Colourless. Now with the spare space, I would like to fit in another Special Dark, since it's like another permanent plus power on top of Darkclaw to further increase your damage output. So say you attach a Special Dark to your Zoro turn 1 and use Ascension, evolve to Zoroark through the effect of Ascension, attach another energy and Darkclaw, and get a full bench, which sounds like a lot, but it isn't really a lot of setup to do with this deck. You're going to be hitting for 150 damage on turn 2. That's going to knock out anything that isn't an EX, and 2-shot safely and comfortably any EX with anything like Eviolite, Defender, anything on it. So overall, Special Darkness is just too much of an asset to Dark Pokemon not to play. Don't play 4 in this skeleton list at the moment because it can't get searched out the discard pile and attached with Dark Patch, and that is the only reason why some people might not want to play the max of the special energy and just bump up their normal energy count a bit more. 6 Darkness energy seems to be a little bit low, but when you'll be using it a lot with Dark Patch, you have 4 Dark Patch and 4 Junkarm, you won't be needing it too often. If you do feel like you're running out of energy or can't get it into the discard pile that often, then do use the spare space to put in a couple more normal dark. And then onto your 3 double colourless energy. I haven't got 4 in here yet, but you can use the spare space to put in another one, because the only attacker you're going to be using with double colourless is your Zoroark, but not your turn 1 Zoroark. Because your Ascension attack on your Zoroark is not a colourless energy, you won't be able to use double colourless to power it up, which means you're going to have to use 2 dark energy attachments for your first Zoroark. This kind of means you can skimp on the 4th double colours because you're not going to be able to use it as much, and it just frees up a free space if you really do need it. And that is pretty much your skeleton list for the deck. It's very simple to play and very simple to pick up, and has a fair few good matchups across the board. And what kind of deck has a good matchup against something that can do 150 on turn 1? Not much at all. So let's move on to a few techs you can include and things you can add in to fill up your free space. Now the first thing you may have realised when I first put the skeleton list on the screen is that the Weavile line is actually quite thin at a 3-2 line. That's because some people don't really like playing Weavile that much and would rather play more Darkrai if you can get your hands on them, and they just want the more space to fill up with more consistency cards like Random Receiver. However, you can go up to a maximum of like 4-3 of Weavile just to keep your disruption at maximum, and more importantly, keep more Dark Pokemon at your disposal to fill up your bench. At the moment, in this skeleton list, you only have 9 basic Pokemon, which isn't going to last you the whole game to fill up your bench consistently. So bumping up the Sneasel to 4 and bumping up the Weavile to 3 will give you a lot more disruption capabilities throughout the game, and can just give you that late game claw snag much more consistently, put your opponent on a very difficult hand size. Another Pokemon you can think about putting in is the Zoroark from Black and White, since it does evolve from Zora. This will be very helpful in matchups that use high hit point EXs such as Reshiram, Zekrom, Raikou could even be interesting since you don't need to discard the lightning energy because you don't have any attached. It's just a free 100 damage anywhere on the field, which is incredibly powerful, especially against stuff like Zekrom Eels. So yeah, you can just catch up any Pokemon you want on your opponent's side of the field and just use an attack you want for the turn. What this would mean is you run 3 of the ones from Dark Explorers and 1 from Black and White, and if you get a good start, you can just, it's like having a tech for anything against your opponent's deck. Whatever they have tech, you can use yourself. So the most powerful thing is stuff like Volt Strike and especially Raikou's attack. So definitely consider this because it's only a double colourless energy and still be powered up with Dark Patch anyway. So definitely consider this as a tech option. Another Pokemon you can include isn't a dark Pokemon, which is why I haven't put it in the skeleton list, but it does help against your biggest weakness, fighting. Your whole deck is fighting weak, so stuff like Terrakion and Groudon and even Donphan are gonna prove to be quite an issue, knocking out all of your Pokemon in one hit. So what I've decided to include as a tech option is either normal Tornadus or Tornadus EX. Both resist fighting and both have attacks that you can power up gradually with double colourless energy. Now if you do include any of these, I would suggest bumping up your double colourless to 4 since you aren't going to be able to use Dark Patch to attach them since they aren't dark Pokemon. Now deciding between the two, regular Tornadus I really like because it conserves energy. It can put dark energy onto your Pokemon that don't necessarily need it for the turn but will need it the turn after you've used Hurricane. But Tornadus EX has a lot more quicker attack with a 30 plus 30 if there's a stadium in play. Depending on what your opponent's playing, it has a Power Blast for 100 for 3 colourless energy, which can really set back your opponent's fighting Pokemon when you pair it with Snipe, with Weavile, and stuff like Darkrai that you do have in your deck. Personally, I like the option of moving your energy with Tornadus' Hurricane a lot more, and not giving up the 2 prizes with Tornadus EX when you're up against something like Zekrom Eels and you start with it. It's going to put you 2 prizes behind very quickly because they will jump on that straight away. Either way, do consider putting any of these in. It's not necessary because your Zoroarks do manage to 1-hit KO Terrakions and 2-hit KO Groudon, so you will be getting the prize exchange there. But if you do feel like you're struggling against fighting types, do include either the Tornadus just to help you along in that matchup a little bit more. And finally, you do have the option of running no double colourless and running a more experience share version of this build. Since your first Zoroark is going to have 2 dark energy attached to it to use its attack on the first turn, Ascension, and then use its attack on the second turn, Brutal Bash, when your opponent knocks out your Zoroark, you're going to be needing to use double colourless or keep up with your dark energy attachments throughout the game. What Experience Share helps you do is conserve that energy on your first Zoroark and many to come. But the only problem you do have is that Darkclaw becomes a lot less powerful in the deck. You're going to have to be a lot more careful with your Experience Share and general Pokemon tool attachments because you're not going to be able to replace them. If you attach an Experience Share in the early game and you need that extra 20 damage with Darkness Claw, you're not going to be able to attach it unless you attach it to something else. It will be a lot harder version of the deck to play since you're going to be a lot more conservative with your tool attachments, but it will conserve your energy in the long run and just keep your Zoroarks coming quicker and faster than needing to join into those double colourless energy more efficiently. Do try out both versions. I think the Experience Share version is faster but definitely more difficult to play. And that is your second Dark Explorers deck analysis for you. This deck is incredibly fast, incredibly versatile because of the new trainers we get, and it's just an incredible beat stick deck, which is actually quite easy to play and fairly cheap to build, not including the Darkrai's. It's definitely a very powerful deck, and if you need an alternative dark deck which doesn't run just Darkrai, then definitely give this a spin because it's incredibly competitive, much cheaper than just straight Darkrai, and is definitely very consistent for a large tournament like Nationals as well. So thanks for watching this week's episode of PokeClass. Next week will be another deck analysis on a deck you may consider a rogue option for Nationals, but is still incredibly powerful and includes Stage 2 Pokemon, so it's definitely going to be an incredibly interesting deck indeed. So again, thanks for watching, please rate, comment, subscribe as usual, and thanks for watching.